Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Cameos comes out this week, and personally I've stopped watching the new trailers and TV spots, because apparently so many cool Marvel characters are going to be showing up in this thing that they've just started straight up spoiling some of them in the trailers. But if you're also someone who's trying to avoid spoilers, then you've come to the right place, because in today's video we're going to be looking at a bunch of Marvel variants that are absolutely not going to be in Doctor Strange 2. See, for the last month, I've gotten my subscribers to design their own versions of Marvel characters, setting them in different universes or turning them into different types of creatures. And today I'm going to take 6 of my favorite submissions and redraw them in my own art style, and go over the lore that was submitted with them, and of course show off the other stuff that was submitted, because there was a ton of cool stuff in there. So let's all get hyped for Doctor Strange 2 by looking at some stuff that definitely won't be in it. Let's hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. First up comes to us from Imagina Draws on YouTube or ImaginaEN5 on Instagram, and it's Spider-Man in Demon Slayer. Here's the lore. Peter Parker was the son of 2 of the best medics in Japan, but long ago they died in a demon attack, and unfortunately they wouldn't be the only people young Parker would lose to demons in his life. He was raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Peter was never the best in physical activity, but he was a genius when it came to medicine and poison, which go hand in hand. When he was 15, demons attacked his village. Uncle Ben tried to lure the demons away. He tried to protect his village and his family, and sadly, he was killed as a result. Ben's sacrifice was a tragedy, but it did buy the Demon Slayers enough time to arrive before anyone else got hurt. They eviscerated the lot of demons, but one did manage to escape. Peter hated the thought of it going out there and hurting more and more people. The idea stuck in his mind as he mourned his uncle's death. One of the Slayers who arrived was Shinobu Kocho. She was the one who saved Peter and his aunt. Peter told her he now had a burning lust for revenge against the demons and wanted nothing more than to protect others from them, to make sure nobody else ever lost loved ones to those monsters, as he had multiple times now. Unfortunately, he also expressed his doubts in his physical abilities. Shinobu took pity on Peter since she had also faced questioning of her own physical abilities. She offered him a deal. If he could make it to the Butterfly Mansion, she would train him to be a powerful warrior and teach him the ancient art of insect breathing. He agreed, and the journey was a harrowing one for young Peter. During his way to the Butterfly Mansion, he encountered many people and underwent his fair share of adventures. But the one that made the most impact on him was meeting Sakonji Urokodaki. On his way up the mountain to the mansion, Peter was attacked by a demon, and Urokodaki saved him. Peter was very inspired by this man and decided to incorporate this experience into his own outfit. After that encounter, Peter started wearing a mask. After what felt like years, Peter finally arrived at the Butterfly Mansion. Shinobu Kocho was impressed and immediately began training the young Slayer to be. Peter was grateful for this opportunity and all she'd end up teaching him, but eventually he did decide to work on his own terms. When he finally felt ready, he left and set off to find the one demon that had escaped his village. Now, I was glad to see that there were a bunch of really cool Demon Slayer submissions, because I've been requested a bunch of times to do a Demon Slayer episode and I still haven't. Last year I read like the first 19 volumes of the manga, and then I don't know what happened. I think I just moved on to reading Naruto and did an episode around that instead. So now I'm thinking I might go back and watch the anime instead of continuing the manga, because I've forgotten a bunch of the plot points. And obviously watching the anime means I'll know the pronunciations of characters' names better. But anyway, I had a lot of fun drawing this character in my style, and one thing that I added to it that doesn't really represent what insect breathing actually looks like in the anime or manga is I have some webs kind of spilling off the blade. I sort of added that myself just as a fun reference. I was almost kind of thinking of it a little bit like the water breathing technique and the style of that, but you know, also I just wanted another Spider-Man-y kind of thing in there, and it kind of helped give the vibe of movement a little bit more with the sword. I am still planning to do a Demon Slayer episode at some point, but as a way to hold people over, I think this is a good option. Thank you for the submission, Imagina Draws, and I hope everybody likes the result. Next up comes to us from Alexander Tatjian, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, and it's Black Widow if she was in Overwatch. Here's the lore. Natasha Romanoff spent much of her early childhood training to be the ultimate killer. She'd been taken in by the terrorist organization Talon and was being forged into their next great tool of destruction and chaos. She'd been trained in long-range weaponry by Widowmaker, fear tactics by Reaper, hacking and information retrieval by Sombra. She truly was becoming a silent and lethal force, until she started questioning their motives. Eventually, she started to see that they definitely were not the good guys. Talon tried everything to ensure her ideals would keep aligning with theirs, even trying to beat her into submission. But, in an unfortunate twist for them, they'd trained her too well to surrender. Sadly, her sister, Yelena, had fallen under Talon's full control and believed in their mission. At least for a while longer than Natasha did. Natasha eventually fled Talon, swearing someday to come back for her sister, though the organization didn't let her go easily. She was nearly killed upon her escape and was found bleeding out by two members of the hero group Overwatch. Mercy and Genji helped her get back to full health at an Overwatch compound, and they eventually would become like adoptive parents to her. Nat did want to continue training as a fighter, but now with the intent to take down Talon and save Yelena from their brainwashing. Genji helped her hone her skills as an assassin even further, and she became close with many of the other members of Overwatch as well, quickly seeing them as her new family, a real loving family like none she'd ever had before, other than Yelena. When she was old enough, Nat became a full-fledged member of the Overwatch team. As a sort of graduation gift, she was even given twin Energy Tanto blades, similar to those of her mentor, Genji. She would go on to help Overwatch with some of their most daring adventures, but all the while, she was plotting with them how to take down Talon and finally bring her sister to her new family and her new home. Now, for a bunch of the submissions in this, I am rewriting the lore a little bit, not because there's anything wrong with it, just to format it a bit better for the videos. Like this submission by Alexander, it was really great, but the lore was written out in kind of more jot notes, like a bunch of different facts about the character, so I took that and sort of reforged it into a bit more of a story format. Some of these, like the first submission, I just flesh out some little bits or add a little bit more drama to the way I say it. There's one submission coming up later that's a really cool Ghost Rider, Dragon, Drake kind of thing that I do a little bit more rewriting of because the person who submitted it wrote it from Tayron's perspective, one of my own original characters, and I really liked that, but there were some things in it where I was like, I don't know if I want that to be canon, so I'm gonna change that, tweak that a little bit. But anyway, back to this submission. Alexander has been in my almost chosen folder like a dozen times now, so it's long overdue for me to finally redraw one of Alexander's submissions, and I'm really glad it was this one. This was super fun. I love Overwatch. Black Widow's a character I don't really use that much on the channel, even though I've done tons of Marvel and Avengers stuff. And of course, now that Overwatch 2 is finally approaching release, I'm thinking maybe I'll do another Overwatch episode, maybe even finally do another Overwatch D&D. I don't know, I haven't decided for sure. I'd have to go back and rewatch those videos to remember the lore, because I've forgotten a bunch of it at this point. But anyway, I thought this was a really good idea, it was well executed, and I had a lot of fun drawing it in my style. I hope you all like the result. Thanks for the submission, Alexander. Now before we move on to Dr. Octopus, if he was in Skylanders, we've got to take a look at a whole bunch more of the submissions that came in for this month that didn't end up getting chosen for the redraw, mostly because, you know, I can only do 6 characters. There was tons of cool stuff sent in as always. Usually for these episodes, I'll have story or lore or conversation going over the submission scrolls, kind of just mixed in with everything. But because of the format of this episode, it didn't really fit, so I'm just going to do 2 big chunks of it during the video. Doing this kind of episode is definitely useful for me as a creator because I get to see what kinds of franchises are recurring a lot, what kinds of things lots of people are putting Marvel characters into for me to get a better sense of, you know, what future episodes I could make on the channel. For instance, a lot of people were making Demon Demon Slayer designs, a good reminder that I should do a Demon Slayer focused episode. There were a bunch of Hollow Knight submissions as well, so maybe I should do another Hollow Knight episode. I don't know if I'll do a sequel to my Hollow Knight horror story episode. Maybe I will, closer to whenever Silksong comes out, if it ever comes out. But there's lots of other cool things I could do with Hollow Knight characters as well. But anyway, there was also a surprising amount of Pirates of the Caribbean submissions. I had no idea that Pirates of the Caribbean was still so popular. I mean, I absolutely loved it. I've watched all the movies, or at least the first 3, a whole bunch of times. So maybe I should do an episode around that at some point. I mean, I have done my Hero Academia Pirates episode, but, that wasn't Pirates of the Caribbean specific. Anyway, we'll go through more of the submissions later, but let's move on to another redraw. Next, we have Dr. Octopus as a Skylander from Tobias Ivory. Here's the lore. In the Skylands, there was a group of evil menaces known as the Doom Raiders. One of these villainous wretches was called Dr. Crankcase. He was a mad scientist and the resident genius inventor of the group, but no one really knew that he actually had an assistant alongside him, known as Dr. Octopus. Unfortunately, Crankcase didn't really treat his subordinate that well. He didn't actually care about Octopus, he just wanted to use the Doctor's skills to bolster himself up. His only true goal was to impress the Doom Raiders' leader, the mighty and fierce Golden Queen. For a time, Octopus was willing to remain in Crankcase's shadow, and focused on enacting evil deeds that would impress his master. This could only last for so long though, as Crankcase never showing Octopus any appreciation and always taking credit for his actions would eventually weigh heavy on Dr. Octopus. Soon enough, Octopus became completely fed up and just left the Doom Raiders. Crankcase didn't seem to care, and none of the others even really knew. Most hadn't known him, or if they did, didn't even know his name. But Dr. Octopus would ensure that someday they did. Dr. Octopus decided to make his own evil team, more evil and powerful than anything the Doom Raiders could achieve. He went so far as to name his team after his former one, to eventually try to usurp them as the dominant raiders of the Skylands. He called his villainous band the Sinister Raiders. There eventually came to be 7 members of this team, each with a different mastery over an element of the Skylands. Dr. Octopus of the Tech element, Green Goblin of Fire, Sandman of Earth, Lizard of Life, Electro of the Light, Vulture of the Air element, and Mysterio of the Magic element. They would become a treacherous force of the Skylands, and while the meddling Skylanders would eventually lock the group away in Cloudcracker Prison, another opportunity would soon after rear its head. You see, a member of Octopus's former group, the Doom Raiders, had also been locked away in Cloudcracker Prison and would escape while he and his team were there. And Octopus witnessed the whole thing, and of course had a thorough knowledge of the Doom Raiders' team's inner workings. He and his Sinister Raiders would make a deal with the Skylanders. They would fight alongside them and go take down the Doom Raiders in exchange for the Sinister Group's freedom. Octopus had intended to eventually betray the Skylanders in this agreement, and simply was using this as a chance to overthrow the team that had so cruelly ignored his genius. But in working with the Skylanders, he came to see that they truly were the right side to be fighting with. With this change of heart, Octopus and his team would fight along the Skylanders to eventually take down the Doom Raiders, take down Chaos, and every other evil threat to the lands. Thanks to Octopus, this unexpected hero, the Skylands finally found peace. Now this was an exciting one to do because I've done a few Skylanders focused episodes, turning Skylanders into freakier fantasy monster versions of themselves and turning them into superheroes, but I've never done an episode turning something into an actual Skylander, and I really dug this design that Tobias submitted, and it was really fun getting to play around with the positioning of the different limbs. Sometimes when I'm drawing a character with tons of different limbs, it can be kind of daunting, especially if all the limbs have a lot of details to them, but because this is a Skylanders character, the limbs were a little bit more on the cartoony side, so once I got them posed and everything, I could pretty much just move right on to inking. I thought this was a really fun design, it was good lore, it was fun to work with, I like how it looks in my style, and I hope you all do as well. Thanks for the submission, Tobias. Let's take a look. Next up, we've got Gigasoup submitting She-Hulk if she was in the fighting game Skullgirls. In her past life, Jennifer Walters was one of the most respected lawyers in New Meridian City, and was no stranger to being around those with incredible wealth. She had wildly wealthy clients, made quite large sums herself, and would often go to parties with the rich and famous. But it was at one of these very parties where she met her, well, not her end, but her new beginning. Along with her father, Jennifer was attending the birthday party of Selene Contiello, a young woman whose family had ties to the Medici Mafia. The Contiellos thought having a pre-existing relationship with the Medici would keep them safe, but they were proven wrong on that fateful night. You see, at that party, Selene was to be given the Skull Heart, an incredibly valuable and coveted artifact that appears every 7 years and can grant a woman a wish. The Medici family heard this item was being given to Selene, and they immediately turned on the Contiello family, wanting the Skull Heart for themselves. They went to her party and mercilessly opened fire on everyone. Jennifer was riddled with bullets and yet somehow managed to cling to life and crawl away. She escaped into an alleyway, livid and horrified. Along with Selene's family, one of the many casualties had been Jennifer's father. She was barely holding on in that alleyway, but upon hearing about the massacre, Jennifer's cousin, Dr. Bruce Banner, had come running. He found Jennifer just as she was slipping away, but she did manage to give one final request, though not an easy one for Bruce. Jennifer's dying wish was for Bruce to save her by any means possible, even if it meant giving up who she once was, in order to avenge her father. She barely got the words out as she passed on, and with that, a version of Jennifer Walters died. Her vision faded out, and for a time there was nothingness. But eventually, she did come back. When she woke, she was covered in stitches. Her arms and legs felt strange, stronger, heavier. As her vision returned more and more, she finally saw that her limbs had been replaced with those of a Gigan, a savage, war-hungry race of giants from the Gigan Nation. Bruce had saved her the only possible way he could, replacing horribly damaged parts of her with mightier limbs. The cost, of course, was to never look like a normal human again. Despite this, she was thankful and trained to get used to her new form, finding her new Gigan strength incredibly empowering. She now waits for 7 years, hoping that someday she can get her hands on the Skull Heart for herself. Then she can use it to change everything, to bring her father back. In those 7 years, she's gained a new profession, battling in the ring against some of the fiercest opponents around under the new name, She-Hulk. Now, when I'm doing community redraw episodes and I'm picking who I'm going to use, I do factor in people I've picked before. If I've picked someone before for a community redraw, which, I don't always remember every single person I've done before because I've done so many of these now, but if I know I've used someone's work before, I'll consider them slightly less than someone else. So if you have been picked before, it's harder to get picked again. But it does happen. And this is one of those times. I have used one of Gigasoup's characters before, and funny enough, it was the last time I did an episode like this, a redraw episode, where I'm just redrawing the person's character and reading out the lore that was submitted. But I really, really love Gigasoup's art style, and I think Skullgirls was a perfectly fitting franchise for you to work with. Anyway, I love this submission, I really loved getting a chance to draw it in my style, and I hope Gigasoup and everyone else likes how it turned out. Alright, and here's a second set of submissions, and I wasn't really sure what to talk about during this going, but going through it and looking at these images again, kept getting me thinking about picking topics on the channel and how I pick topics on the channel as a mix of what my audience wants, what I want to work on, what works well for the algorithm. Those are all things that sometimes I'll lean more towards one than the other when I'm picking a topic, but they're all always factors. And it's funny, in the early days of the channel, the topics that would generally always bring in an audience, bring in more people than usual, were Marvel, My Hero Academia, and Ben 10. Nowadays, it's more so Minecraft, SCPs, and FNAF. I think part of that seems like lots of people like things with a bit more of a horror element to them, even if I'm not doing something horror related with them, taking something from a horror franchise and turning them into something else, or taking something cute and making it horrifying. But also the fact that YouTube is a very general platform, but there is a bit of an emphasis on gaming, so anytime I'm taking stuff from a video game franchise, that always feels like it's a little bit more likely to do well. Anime stuff feels like it's really taken a dip in interest on the channel. Anytime I try out a new anime topic, doesn't tend to do super well. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do it anymore, because I'm a big fan of lots of different anime and manga, and I know there are plenty of people in my audience that are interested in that, but it's just been interesting to see how the general interest of my overall audience seems to have dipped in the anime department. Again, these are all kind of just general observations I've made over doing YouTube full-time for the last couple years, or more than a couple years. It's been like 2.5 years of doing this full time now. Oh, this job is so great. But anyway, I've probably rambled long enough to go through a bunch of the submissions, so let's get back into the next two drawings, shall we? The next submission is Ultron in Star Wars from Crimson Nova 510. Here's the lore. Droids are far from a rare form of being, found in near every corner of the galaxy, and it's not uncommon for them to have artificial intelligence. It can help them problem solve for their masters, learn new information to help spread to those they serve, but there is always the danger that this intelligence can allow them to learn too much. Ultron was a droid whose origins are still unknown to this day. Nobody knows who built him or why, simply that he lived long enough and evolved his intelligence and knowledge with such a lust for more and more information that he eventually had learned near everything there was to know about the universe, its planets, and its residents. He'd eventually been able to tap into computer and communication systems from near every planet and system, knowing all their movements and trade routes, and most importantly, their weaknesses. You see, he eventually came to see biological life as a blight on the universe, a prior step in evolution that was long overdue to be eradicated. He used the incredible reach of his power to turn every droid in the galaxy against biological life, and begin a tirade against the living. The Sith, who'd attempted galactic conquest themselves in the past, at first thought there was potential in aligning with Ultron. They tried to arrange a meeting with him, but he instead sent an army of drones to ambush and overwhelm them. In the span of just a week, Ultron eradicated the Sith, then moved on after that to the Jedi. But their main source of power, the thing they claimed flowed through all life, the Force, did intrigue him. As his machines continued their onslaught across the galaxy, Ultron began studying the ancient texts of both the Jedi and Sith. Books that had never been digitized, and as such he'd never had access to before. It took him time, but eventually, with this information and new knowledge paired with an undying desire for power, Ultron was actually able to gain control over the Force himself. He was the first machine to ever artificially gain access to the very power of the Force, tipping the balance of the supernatural life energy to chaotic levels. The side of light was threatened with eternal darkness, while even the side of dark was forcibly bent by the will of the rising droid emperor of the galaxy. Soon, it was clear that stopping him was near impossible, and yet, if nothing was done, soon all life across the galaxy would be replaced. This dark time would later be called the Age of Darth Ultronus. There was a really good bit at the end there where I tried not to edit the lore that was just very poetic sounding that I really liked. Well done on that, Crimson Nova. And on this whole submission, I really liked this idea. It was super cool. And I've gotten lots of requests lately to do something Star Wars related, and I think that's because of the Lego game that came out. It was around that time that I started seeing a lot more comments about doing a Star Wars video. I don't know why Star Wars isn't a topic that I use more often. Besides the Mandalorian videos, I haven't really used it much in the last couple years. So I'll make sure to keep it in mind, especially with Kenobi coming up soon, because I'm very excited for that one. Love Obi-Wan Kenobi as a character. And of course, I'm a big fan of Ultron, so I really like getting to draw this Star Wars version of him. The only thing I changed, I guess it's not really much of a change, is I added a bit of a Kirby crackle around the lightsaber, because I thought that would be a cool Marvel-y kind of thing to add in, and it's something they used as an effect a bunch in the What If show. But anyway, this was really fun to draw, it was a great idea, and well executed, Crimson Nova. Hope you and everyone else like it. Here you go. Next up, and finally, we've got Ghost Rider as a dragon or drake, submitted by Finn Over. Here's the lore, written from the perspective of Tayrin the Beast Chronicler. As I grow more open to the magic in my world, there are certain dragons who both fill me with awe and with fear. Perhaps the most prominent of these in recent memory is the Zarathosian Blazing Roll Rider, primarily native to southwestern North America and Mexico. Not one of the larger types of dragon, the Roll Rider stands about roughly as tall as a Shire horse, but what it lacks in size and strength, it makes up for in speed, maneuverability, and a formidable arsenal. It has a primarily black body with organic steel spikes growing from its shoulders, stomach, wrists, and shins, in addition to half rings growing from the sides of its tail, like a chain. It has bony white armor on the outside of its head that makes it appear somewhat like a skull, and instead of horns, a mane of orange flames emerges from its neck. The Roll Rider derives its name from its main source of locomotion, learned from birth, where it tucks its tail into its mouth and rolls along the ground in the manner of a wheel. It can also change directions mid-roll or deliberately throw itself over an opponent while in combat in order to bring them down from above. Like the Titanic Steaming Troll Hunter, a Germanic dragon I've studied before, the Roll Rider is rumored to be a human given the ability to take draconic form, through a bargain with a demonic prince. The tale goes that it was meant to do the prince's bidding, but it chose to fight against the demon's servants instead. I was more skeptical of this tale until recently. You see, I'd asked a friend of mine, Mara, who happens to have a demon curse she'd acquired in another dimension, to come to my dimension, partially to show her what my world is like, but also to see how the Roll Rider would react to someone with a partially demonic form. When we arrived in the creature's territory, we didn't have to look for it for long, as it quickly found us and immediately tried to catch and kill Mara. We quickly retreated, and of course, this made me more convinced by the tales of the Roll Rider's origins. Likely, if it had caught Mara, the creature would have used its flaming glare to try and end her. This is where the creature shoots rays of flame from its eyes to turn its victims to near ash before devouring them. Curiously, on a final note, Mara had brought a food item with her from her dimension called jelly beans that she dropped as we fled, and as we retreated, we did notice this creature actually stopped and ate the food she dropped. It was unusual to see it eat uncharred food, but I suppose this is simply further evidence that there is much about this creature I've yet to learn. Now, this was the submission I mentioned earlier where I changed some of the lore around, but actually in most of the first half of this, I didn't really have to touch anything. Finn did a really great job writing in Tayrin's tone of voice. The part where I ended up changing stuff more was when we got into the part about Mara, because Finn had this really good idea about Tayrin taking that dragon to Mara's dimension where there's lots of demons and having it kill a demon, and that was a creative and interesting idea, but I didn't really want to make it canon that A, Tayrin had been to Mara's dimension yet, or B, that Tayrin would take a dragon from his dimension and bring it somewhere else. Not totally sure how I feel about that idea, but that's not a criticism on the lore, that's just me being picky about stuff that's done with Multiverse Tales characters. Overall, I thought this was a really creative idea. As I said, the lore was really well written in Tayrin's voice, very eloquent and fitting of him as a character, and it's cool that we've got a canonical Ghost Rider dragon now. Thanks so much for the submission, Finn Over. Here is the final drawing of the episode. Let's take a look. Our new background for the month of May is up. And I don't have to do shoutouts to the people I chose at the end of the video this time because I did it during the video. This is the first time in a while that I've done just a straight up redraw that wasn't Multiverse Tales related, where I didn't change people's characters into anything, I just redrew them myself. It was a nice change of pace. But speaking of which, the next month's community redraw prompt is going to be for another Multiverse Tales story. The characters from Multiverse Tales are going to be having a little bit of a skirmish, or scrimmage. I think those are genuinely two different words, but I don't know what the difference between them is. Anyway, they're gonna be having a little friendly competition with each other, seeing who can create the toughest thing for a little fight. There is a Google Docs document linked with instructions in the description, and for this you can pick one of 5 things to design: a Vasilia Kuznet fantasy armor, a Benny Sharp mech armor, a dragon made by Tayrin, a fusion creature that's a mix of other Multiverse Tales monsters by Astra, and a fifth thing that at the time I'm recording this I haven't decided what it is, but by the time you're watching it will be in the Google Docs document. So if you want to go participate, just read that thing, and read carefully because there are more specific instructions for each of those topics in the Google Doc. Please make sure to follow the instructions. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I've got a bunch of the story mapped out already, and I'm excited to see what you all submit. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or uplifting note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti, which is that the ability to observe without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence. I like that quote because I think it's important to try and look at things without immediately judging them. I hope that's helpful to someone out there. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.